Hello, we are live for Old Hollywood. The dog's going crazy with me. I don't see anybody in chat quite yet, but we're going to be getting started here with Elizabeth Taylor, Old Hollywood. I have to tell you, this is probably one of the biggest, most extensive research uh, and slides that I've ever done for one of these, and uh, I, I hope that I don't have to do another one this big again because it is really big. Um, I mean, of course, she's she's a classic, and with over 55 films to her name, 8 husbands, all kinds of triumphs, all kinds of tragedies. Um, Iconic, and that's why we're doing her. So, well, hello, Mary Lou. How are you? Hi, Michaela. How are you? Welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. Um, this is a really big stream. So, let's get started. Because even with Judy Garland, for anybody that was here for Judy Garland, um, I only had 2 Google slideshows for that, right? That are roughly 99 pictures in each slide. This has 4 slideshows. So let's get going. Are you guys ready? Are you excited? I mean, you voted for her. Well, hello, Natalie. Welcome. Good timing. We're just getting started. Big stream, okay? There she is, the beautiful Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Rosamond Taylor was born February 27, 1932. She was born in London, England. Her parents were both Americans living in Europe. Her father, Francis, ran a art gallery. He was very successful. He provided for his family very well. And Elizabeth's mother, Sarah, had been a former stage actress, but she left the stage when Elizabeth's older brother, Howard, was born, and devoted herself to just being a full-time wife and mother. Elizabeth had an idyllic childhood. There are rumors that she did not open her eyes for the first 10 days of her life. And then when she did, of course, those stunning blue eyes, some people refer to them as violet. I think that mostly depended on the studio lighting. But Elizabeth Taylor was definitely always known for her eyes, even as a child. And in fact, once on set, one of the cameramen asked Elizabeth to go take off her fake eyelashes. And she said, I'm not wearing any fake eyelashes. And he said, well, then go have your mother take off your mascara. And she said, I'm not wearing any mascara either. She had been born with a double set of lashes. We should all be so lucky. There's Liz and her brother Howard in England. Her childhood was idyllic. Her mother was very determined that Elizabeth would marry some kind of royalty, right? Preferably like a duke or higher. And she set out to make sure, it's Elizabeth with her father, Francis, she set out to make sure that Elizabeth became a perfect little lady. And so there were elocution classes, dance classes, writing lessons, everything that an English lady, a proper English lady would have. Hold on here. You obviously haven't had any lessons, and that's why you're interrupting me, right? Right? Okay. All right. I love you too. This was Elizabeth's mother on stage. There she is. And there's Sarah with Elizabeth and her brother Howard. So that was Sarah's whole goal, We don't even hear much about Howard. Sarah's goal was to see Elizabeth marry very, very, very well. But in 1939, as Europe was really on the brink of war, Elizabeth's father decided that he needed to move his family to America. He wanted to get them kind of out of any kind of harm's way or line of fire. And so he got the family ready. He put them on a ship. He could see that war was coming. He didn't think England would necessarily be involved. But the things that were happening were really scary, and he wasn't going to take a chance with his family. Put them on a ship to get them out of there. And it was on that ship, on that boat ride to America from England, that Elizabeth and her mother and brother saw their very first film. And there they are on the ship. And it was Shirley Temple's The Little Princess, which I have to tell you, and it's been remade, but I have to tell you, when I was a kid, one of my very, 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 very favorite movies, right? Well, hi, Sarah Painter. How are you? So it was at that moment, seeing this film with Shirley Temple, that Elizabeth's mother decided that she would change the trajectory, right? Because we didn't have royalty in America. She decided that if her daughter couldn't marry royalty, that she would make her a star. The family landed in California, Bel Air. They lived a very nice life. Elizabeth was enrolled in a very exclusive school. And her father, when he came over, he began to own and operate another art gallery, this time in Beverly Hills. And Elizabeth's mother, very determined, and they did have money, so she did run in certain circles. She befriended Hedda Harper, as well as the chairman of Universal Pictures. And Hedda Harper, for anybody that doesn't know or might be too young and haven't really ever heard of her, Hedda Harper was a big deal. She was, she wasn't like an entertainment reporter, and she knew everybody, and everybody wanted to be on Hedda's good side. And Sarah Taylor, Elizabeth's mother, befriended her and got so close to her that Hedda Harper, there she is, Elizabeth actually called her Aunt Hedda. So Elizabeth Taylor's mother really knew how to get in there and schmooze the people that she needed to. Now, in 1940, Gone with the Wind was released, and huge deal, right? Still, that movie will always be an epic. And it seemed that Sarah Taylor couldn't go anywhere without people commenting on how much Elizabeth looked like Vivien Leigh. And she really does. When I was researching and I heard that comparison, I thought, oh, yeah. I could definitely see that. I could definitely see the resemblance between Vivien Leigh and Elizabeth Taylor. And of course, Vivien Leigh played Scarlett O'Hara, for anybody that doesn't know. So Sarah thought, I have to capitalize on this because Gone with the Wind was such a big deal. And she immediately began calling in favors, right, with people that she knew to get Elizabeth auditions. And Elizabeth's very, very first movie role, she didn't even have billing. It was such a small part. It was with Universal Pictures, and it was called There's One Born Every Minute. And it ended up being a really good thing that Elizabeth didn't have any billing, because when this movie bombed, nobody reviewed her performance. right? The critics would tend to only review people that had their names on the posters and had received billing. They didn't bother with all the bit part actors, right? So there's Elizabeth Taylor. And that is, I can't remember his first name. That's Alfalfa from Our Gang, or later like the Little Rascals. And you could see him a little bit better there. And so that was her very first picture. She signed a 7-year contract with Universal Studios for $100 a week. And even though her father, Francis, he strongly objected to Elizabeth being in the movies. He absolutely was no match for his wife. Sarah was going to see Elizabeth in the films no matter what. And especially when she realized that when they left in 1939, and Europe was on the brink of war, I'm really right there. She now realized a couple years later that they were not going back to Europe or England anytime soon. She had kind of hoped or held an idea when they came over that it would just be for a short time, that the war or the rumblings of the war would either not reach England or like fizzle out before it got to England, and it certainly wouldn't last as long as it ended up lasting. When she realized that the war wasn't slowing down, it was gaining speed, that made her even more determined to see Elizabeth become this star, right? Well, like we said, the first, like I told you, There's One Born Every Minute, it was a box office flop. And a year into her contract with Universal, they terminated it, right? So Sarah then went to Aunt Hedda, her good friend Hedda Harper, and she asked her to pull some strings over at MGM. And MGM had started filming a movie called Lassie Come Home. But what had happened was the girl who had been cast to play opposite Roddy McDowall had a growing spurt and had grown too tall to play opposite to him. So Elizabeth showed up at the studio with Hedda Harper and her mother, and they had the girls lined up to recast that role that Elizabeth would eventually play as the young daughter of the very wealthy businessman who buys Lassie from the poor family. And when Hedda went in, the guy that was doing the casting, he said, "Oh, Hedda, okay, what have I done? You know, are you mad at me?" She said, No. I brought you somebody that you must see." And he said, it's too late. You know, we already have the final girls. And she said, Hedda said, "No, you have to see her. I insist." And Elizabeth had to audition right there in front of these other girls who were literally just moments away from one of them getting chosen. And she auditioned with a mop, playing the role of like a stand-in for the dog. Of course, she got the part, right? There she is. Roddy McDowall would become a very dear friend of hers. They would stay friends for all of their lives. And Lassie Come Home was a big hit. There they are together. And again, what a beautiful child. And there's Louis B. Mayer, our very favorite villain, right? I just can't stand that guy. The more I know about him, I just can't stand that guy. Louis B. Mayer saw box office gold in Elizabeth Taylor. I mean, if we have to say one thing about him, he could spot talent, right? He immediately signed Elizabeth to a very well. Hi, Stephanie. Welcome. he signed Elizabeth to a very long contract, but he was kind of having a hard time finding a place to put her. But he wasn't going to let her go. Louis B. Mayer didn't do that with anybody that he signed. It was quite normal for the studios to loan stars out to other studios, especially if that star wasn't doing anything at the moment. If they would loan an actor or actress out to another studio, the other studio had to pay that weekly salary. So it lessened the burden on MGM if they could loan their actors and actresses out sometimes, right? It didn't hurt them at all to do that. And in 1944, Elizabeth was loaned out to 20th Century Fox. There she is once she signed with MGM, as we know from our stream with Judy Garland. The kids went to school on the lot, right? The lot was their whole entire life. They went to school on the lot. They ate on the lot. They worked on the lot. There she is with some of the other kids. She, lifelong lover of animals. She was known to bring animals to set. She had pet chipmunks, and sometimes they would have to remove the chipmunk from the set during filming because it would just be chattering away. She loved her animals. She had from a very young age, she had a very natural mothering instinct. And people that have that natural maternal instinct tend to love animals because that's something that you can take care of. And that's what that mother nurturing instinct is, right? It's the yearning to take care of something and nurture it. She was loaned out in 1944 to 20th Century Fox for a small role in Jane Eyre. There she is. There she is. And once she was back on MGM, MGM had acquired the film rights to National Velvet, and they had held on to those film rights. They'd had them for 9 years, but they had never been able to find an actress to play the part. And Elizabeth wanted that part. She felt like that part was absolutely made for her. She knew how to ride. She, of course, had an English accent, however slight, she really just constantly, her and her mother, just were hounding the studio executives to at least let her audition for this role. And they said, well, the problem is that we had somebody, the person that we have in mind, we think needs to be more developed. Elizabeth was only 12 years old. They said, you're too skinny. You're not tall enough. I mean, you're just going to look like a baby on this enormous horse. And it's not going to play out right on screen. And Elizabeth and her mother said, give us just a little bit of time. And she ended up going on a 3-month weight gain diet. And luckily for her, in 12 weeks, she also grew 3 inches. So when she returned and asked if they could give her a screen test, things had changed dramatically enough for the studio to say, you might be right. And they gave her the screen test, and the rest is history. And I have to tell you that I never saw National Velvet. Of course, I knew of it. I never saw it until I started doing research for this, and I found it on a streaming channel that we have here in the States called Tubi. It's a free streaming channel. And every now and then, if I can't find something on HBO or or like an older movie on Netflix, HBO, Star, Prime, Hulu, whatever, I'll go to like the free streaming channels and look for the older movies there, and a lot of times I find it. And I found it, and I have to tell you that this movie is so good. Was so unexpected to me. It was joyful to watch it. I just I fell in love with it. And she really commanded the screen. She did such an amazing job as Velvet Brown. I don't want to give a spoiler alert. There she is on set with the horse. She plays a little girl who kind of comes across this horse that's running wild, and this man is chasing this horse, and the horse's name is Pie, and the guy determines, because he can't control the horse, that he's just going to get rid of this horse. So they decide to sell it in a raffle, and Velvet Brown wins it. And she wants to race. She realizes that this is it's a racehorse is what it is. It's not a farm horse. That's why it was acting up. It's not doing what it was born to do. And so she begins to train with Mickey Rooney. She played opposite of Mickey Rooney. It was a great cast, great movie. Of course, Mickey Rooney, MGM, want to hit their little box office darlings, right? And he kind of plays a grifter. There she is on the set. She's reaching up to the gaffing where the director is. And you see he's reaching down and they're touching hands. She really had the time of her life on this. She was injured. She did fall off the horse when the horse was doing a jump. She was kind of ejected from the saddle, and she fell and she injured her back. But she wouldn't go to the hospital. She said no, because I said, okay, let's just call it a wrap for today. And she said no, and she got back up on the horse and finished filming. But that fall would cause her back problems and an addiction to opioids throughout her life. That's really where the spinal injury initiated from, was on the filming of this movie. But girls can't be jockeys. So she can't ride Pie in the national. And so she disguises herself as a boy. And I don't know who could believe that this gorgeous child, adolescent, how you could ever believe she was a boy. But that's the movies, right? And so she pulls it off in the movie. And National Velvet was a complete box office success. It made her a star. As a matter of fact, from that moment on, whenever she did a movie, she had a star on her dressing room door. It changed the trajectory of her life without a doubt. The critics loved it. The fans loved it. The public loved it. The studio obviously loved it. And MGM, Louis B. Mayer, loved it so much that he signed Liz. She was 12 years old. He signed her to an 18-year long-term contract with MGM. And Liz herself, in her own words, later said that movie, as much as she loved it, made her the studio's chattel for the next 18 years. The studio also gave her the horse when filming was done, and she loved that. There she is with Louis B. Mayer. He liked, especially when his starlets were making him a lot of money. He always liked to make sure there was some publicity with him. We saw him do it with Judy Garland as well. But don't be fooled by that adoring gaze that Liz is giving him, because their relationship would not be that good for very long. In 1946, Elizabeth, she did get top billing this time in a movie called The Courage of Lassie. And here's a fun fact. The dog's name was actually Bill. And that's what they call the dog in the movie. They kind of bill it later as he's the son of Lassie, right? But the movie's name, the studio changed the film's name 3 times before it was released. And the name Lassie is never even heard in the movie, right? At 14, Elizabeth really witnessed firsthand how brutal and ruthless and cold Louis B. Mayer could be. She went to his office with her mother. Sarah, Elizabeth's mother, wanted music lessons and better roles for her daughter. And they felt after National Velvet that Liz commanded that, right? And Louis B. Mayer absolutely flipped out. Elizabeth Taylor later said that he used a 4-letter word that she had never heard before in her life. She had a great sense of humor. And she said, since then, it's become one of my favorite words. But at the time, I'd never heard such vulgarity as that. Mayer started to scream and yell. He started hurling curse words. And he looked at Sarah and he said, "Don't you tell me how to run my business. You both are gutter snipes." And Elizabeth said that without even hesitating or thinking twice, she snapped back at him and said, "You and your studio can both go to hell. If you don't apologize to my mother, I don't care if I never make another movie for your studio. I'd rather go to high school and football games than ever make another movie for you." She later said that at that moment, she realized how valuable she was to MGM because, as she said, if she hadn't been so valuable after that outburst to Louis B. Mayer, she said, I'd have been out on my fanny. And she wasn't. I mean, you can see she was everywhere, right? And but after that confrontation in Louis B. Mayer's office, they never spoke to each other ever again. Even though she stayed under contract with MGM, they never, ever spoke. If Louis had something that had to be told for her, he sent somebody else to talk to her or her mother, to give the orders or whatever it was. They never spoke again. But, you know, I think back to when we did the Judy Garland Old Hollywood, and I wonder what would have happened if Judy had the guts to speak up to Louis B. Mayer the way Elizabeth did. And I don't know where she got it, but she sure did let him have it. But even the friction between Louis B. Mayer and Elizabeth, that didn't stop the studio's publicity department from doing their job. They made sure she was everywhere. This is a book that she wrote called Nibbles and Me, about her favorite chipmunk. So she was she was everywhere and she was doing the thing. And as a matter of fact, when she was 15, the studio's publicity department got her on the cover of Life magazine. She was still a little girl, though. She still had those playful sides. She really did wonder what it would be like to go to high school and go to dances and attend football games, and just be a kid. She did say once, the studio taught me how to be a star. They didn't teach me how to be anything else. And I think we kind of heard that same sentiment from Judy, right? There she is. She was really developing. She was really, she really liked to wear things that kind of cinched in her waist. She liked it that people were always saying how pretty she was and commenting on her eyes. I mean, she was 15, 16 years old. She was starting to understand that being pretty came with maybe a certain amount of a little bit of power. But her mother, Sarah, always tried to ground Elizabeth. And she would tell her, it's okay to want to wear pretty dresses and to have nice things, but you have to understand that pretty comes from the inside. Liz said her mother always told her that. For the next 3 years, she made a bunch of movies, some for Louis B. Mayer, some on loan to other studios. In 1949, 17 years old, she starred in Little Women as the spoiled and vain Amy. Little Women is one of my very favorite movies. There she is. I really like the one with Susan Sarandon as the mother. And I can't remember the name of the girl that played Amy. And Winona Ryder, I think, was Jo. And that's kind of my favorite version of that. But there Elizabeth is as Jo. She also did a couple flops. But she, like I said, she was loaned out. Here's a movie that she did on loan to Warner Brothers, Life with Father. Then she did A Date with Judy. Julia Misbehaves. And it is said that during the filming of this movie, Elizabeth really did start to kind of misbehave. She got a really big crush on Peter Lawford, who was, she played opposite him. He was 10 years older than her. Peter Lawford would later marry one of the Kennedy sisters and kind of played a big part in Marilyn Monroe and JFK and all that. He hung out with the Rat Pack a lot. So if you recognize his name, that's probably where you know it from. So the studio didn't like that at all. They did not like that Elizabeth was kind of mooning over Peter Lawford. So they immediately kind of got one of their other actors that was under contract, as they often did, and started to send them out on dates. Like he was going to be the studio's version of her boyfriend. She didn't like that. And she said, nobody's going to tell me who to date or what to wear or where to go. She said, that's not going to happen. So I think she definitely would have pursued Peter Lawford, but Peter Lawford was, he easily fell back into line with MGM. Okay? He wasn't a big star and he wasn't going to mess up his contract. MGM told him, hands off. She's like a sister to you. That's it. That's all. That was it. That was all. It didn't matter what Elizabeth wanted or what Peter wanted, for that matter. Yeah, I know. Mary Lou says all these older actors and actresses are making me feel my age. I know. When I do the research and I'm like, oh, yeah, I know that name. I know that name. And I think, gosh, are some of the younger people going to even know any of these names? And I'm like, wow. Um, so the next thing, oh, gotta switch slides. Gotta switch slideshows. Here we go. The next role for Elizabeth was she was lent out to Paramount Pictures, and she did A Place in the Sun opposite Montgomery Clift. Look, these two would be lifelong friends, and Elizabeth fell really, really hard for Montgomery Clift. It wasn't well known. It would not have ever been allowed to be well known. But the rumors and the grumblings around the studios and the people that know was that he was terribly insecure, and they said he was struggling with his bisexuality. In fact, he wasn't bisexual; he was homosexual. But I guess they thought calling it bisexuality, it was 1949, 1950. That just wasn't. We all know what the rosy picture of the American household in the 50s were, right? The nuclear family, the dad and the mom that stayed at home in her beautiful dress and high heels and her apron and brought him a martini when he came home. And, you had the son and you had the daughter and you had a dog and you had, a station wagon and all that stuff. Any variation of heterosexuality just wasn't going to work. And the studio definitely wasn't going to let that come out because it cost them money, right? So, but Elizabeth, she didn't really know what that was. She later came to understand. But she still kind of always carried a torch for him. But Elizabeth, she was very good at kind of finding broken people. And then that mothering instinct would kick in, and she would just mother them and love them. And so once Elizabeth kind of accepted that it wasn't in the cards romantically for her and Monty, she called him Monty and he called her Bessie May. She just developed a very mothering, nurturing relationship with him, and they would remain friends all his life. On January 26, 1950, with 13 films and 2 broken engagements behind her, under her belt, Elizabeth graduated from high school. And a month later, there she is with Montgomery Clift. There she is out with one of the studio boyfriends. The studio would say, you're going to go here, or you're going to go there, and we're going to make sure that there's photographers there to get your picture. A month after her graduation, she announced her engagement to Conrad Nicky Hilton. He was, of course, his father, his family owned the Waldorf Astoria and a whole bunch of other hotels. Of course, now the Hilton empire is huge. She'd been dating him for about 9 months, really kind of under the radar. She said she was very close with her parents. She was still living at home. Her life was run by the studio and her parents. That was it. She went where they told her to go, and she did what they told her to do. And she told her friend Debbie Reynolds, because she knew Debbie for years, she said, there's only 2 ways for me to escape, and that's college or marriage. and the studio's not going to let me go to college. So if I want any kind of independence, I have to get married. And I think we heard that same thing from Judy Garland. She rushed right into marriage very soon after she turned 18. Mary Lou says she always looked so elegant no matter what she wore. She was just a classic beauty, wasn't she? Just a classic beauty. At the time of her marriage, so she announced her, she graduated in January. She announced her engagement to Nikki Hilton in February, and they were married in May. But at the time that she married Nikki Hilton, she was filming Father of the Bride. Now, I've never seen the original. Spencer Tracy played her father. I loved the Father of the Bride with Steve Martin as George Banks. I loved that. So her life was kind of imitating art, right? There she is with Spencer Tracy in the movie on set. Such a beauty. There she is with Nikki Hilton. After filming Wrapped, the newlyweds embarked on their honeymoon, a 3-month trip on the Queen Mary. The public was fascinated. I mean, they were a beautiful young couple. They had everything going for them, right? Elizabeth was a star in her own rights. There they are at their wedding. Nikki Hilton was handsome enough, certainly had enough money, and off on their honeymoon she went. It was the first time she had ever made love. She said, just the way I was raised, there would be no sex without marriage. And she said it was a good experience. Nikki was a lot more experienced than Elizabeth when it came to that. He was a little bit older, raised with a lot of money, got to do whatever he wanted to do. But the honeymoon, while maybe on the physical side, had been thrilling for Elizabeth, there were other sides other painful revelations. While she had been dating Nikki for those 9 months, he had been on the wagon. He had not been drinking. But once they got on their honeymoon cruise on the ship, he began drinking. He was gambling a lot and losing. Of course, everywhere that they went on the ship, even if the maitre d', if they'd go to the dining room for dinner, the maitre d' would say, "Oh, Miss Taylor," and take her to the table and go, "Miss Taylor, here's your table." And Nikki would say, "Well, where's the Hilton's table? Where's Mr. Hilton's table?" And the maitre d' would just be, "Oh my God, so sorry, Mr. Hilton, of course, this is your table." And Liz said that he was verbally and mentally very abusive, and then became physically abusive. And then later, during her divorce, she said he just became indifferent. So she said to the judge, she said, "He was indifferent to me." When Elizabeth returned to Hollywood in September of 1950 to film the sequel to Father of the Bride, Father's Little Dividend, the rumor mill was going crazy that her marriage was in trouble, and it was. In January of 1951, she was hospitalized with an infection and was reportedly on the verge. There she is on the set of Father's Little Dividend. It was reported that she was on the verge of nervous collapse. And later that month, her divorce was finalized from Nikki Hilton just in time for the release of the movie. It was really hard for her. She was young, very young. She escaped Hollywood for a time being. She left for England to film Ivanhoe. And there she became reacquainted with actor Michael Wilding. And he was a very well known actor and producer in England. He was 40, she was 20, and they were married. I think he's kind of a dashing looking guy, don't you think? I think there's some pictures of him that he's very handsome. And they look very happy together. They were married in February of 1952, and in January of 1953, Elizabeth gave birth to Michael Wilding. Jemima Josephine, ma'am, always have something to say. My goodness, always have something to say. Do you have something to say about Elizabeth? Can't work with dogs or kids, I'll tell you, especially if they're both. Ma'am, this is a very big stream, and we're only on husband number 2. Okay? All right. My goodness. Oh, my goodness. So finally, 1953, this woman with this huge mothering instinct finally gets to really be a mother, and she was thrilled. Michael Jr. was the first of 2 children that they would have together. Now, she was positively in love with being a mother. It was a role she had played so many times throughout her life with her beloved animals, her beloved friends like Montgomery Clift, and this was just, it was everything she had always wanted. Back at MGM, because obviously her husband had returned to Hollywood with her, Elizabeth negotiated a new 5-year production contract with MGM where she got $5,000 a week for 5 years, and Wilding received $3,000 a week for 3 years. And she really seemed to be happier than ever. She was making one film after the other. In 1955, she gave birth to her second son with Wilding, Christopher. And then, that same year that she gave birth to the second child, she filmed Giant with Rock Hudson and James Dean. Liz, she really found a kindred spirit with Rock Hudson, and he became one of her very closest friends until his death. He was also a homosexual, so there was no chemistry whatsoever, and he was a dashing looking man, not even on her end, but Elizabeth recognized something kind of wounded in him, and I think she felt bad that, like Montgomery Clift, he wasn't allowed, like, she was allowed to get married and have children and go out with her husband and be photographed. And anybody that they loved or had any kind of intimacy with had to be very hidden. There she is with James Dean. She also became very close to James Dean on set. And then, of course, we know that shortly after filming Wrapped, on this film, James Dean, tragically, because he was 24 years old, tragically, he died. He was driving his Porsche in California, and another driver swerved over the center lane, and then swerved left, right in front of James Dean, his Porsche. They hit head on, and he was dead at 24. Elizabeth took it very hard, very hard. In just a kid. Just a kid. Um, there she is with Michael again. And then in April of 1956, she was thrilled when she was reunited with her very favorite friend, Montgomery Clift, on Raintree County. Raintree County was, well, it was like a Southern Civil War drama love story. Um, there's Montgomery Clift, and Elizabeth was just thrilled to be back with Monty. She was also struggling with her marriage to Michael Wilding. There had been a lot of rumors about Michael Wilding's proclivity for strippers, and occasionally things would get out in the press about that. And Elizabeth just felt there was a big disconnect in the marriage, and she asked Wilding for a legal separation. But they still managed to be civil with each other. They would host dinner parties at their home, but they were separated. And while filming Raintree County, Montgomery Clift had gone to a dinner party at Michael Wilding's and Elizabeth's home. And when he left, he fell asleep while driving, and his car hit a telephone pole. He was not far from their home at all. Elizabeth and Michael Wilding actually heard the crash, and immediately, she just had a feeling, immediately showed up on the scene. She's credited with saving Montgomery's life, because when she arrived, he had a broken jaw, he had severe facial injuries, broken teeth, and he was choking. And she reached in and scooped. He had some broken teeth that were lodged in his throat that he was choking on, and she scooped those out. She also really took care of him while he was back on set 9 weeks later. But she really took care of him. He went through, in those 9 weeks, he went through extensive surgeries, including plastic surgeries, for all those facial injuries, his teeth, obviously, and then that broken jaw. It's kind of a miracle that he was back on set. There they are together, back on set in just 9 weeks. I mean, really was shocking. During that time, Elizabeth had come back, got reacquainted with Mike Todd. Mike Todd was the celebrated director of the movie Around the World in 80 Days, which I also hadn't seen before, and I rented it, and I just fell in love with it. So the tabloids are commenting on Michael Wilding's cheating. Liz, they're separated. There's going to be a divorce. And Liz said that the day after she had asked Michael for a formal separation, she got a phone call from Mike Todd, and he said, I want to meet you at the studio. And so she went to the studio, and she was sitting in an office, and she waited and waited and waited, and he wasn't showing up. And so she got ready to leave, and he stormed in, and he grabbed her arm and drug her to this elevator and took her up to this other office that was empty. And he told her, so look, I'm just going to say it the way it is, and I'm going to marry you. And that's just all there is to it. I'm in love with you, and we're going to be married. And she said he went on for like an hour without even taking a breath. And when he finally stopped, she just kind of laughed at him. She thought it was ridiculous. I mean, there was no courting or dating of anything. He just stormed into her life out of seemingly nowhere and told her how it was going to be. And she said, no, no, that's not how it's going to be. And he was livid. And he said, that's it. You're never going to see me ever, ever again for the rest of your life. But when Montgomery Clift returned to the set of Raintree County, Mike Todd showed up that day, and he had a couple dozen red roses, and came over, and Montgomery Clift was there with Elizabeth Taylor and Mike Todd, and they were talking, and Elizabeth Taylor said, "Oh, red roses, how common." And Mike Todd said, "Well, it's a good thing that they're not for you," and handed the bouquet of roses to Montgomery Clift. And Elizabeth loved that. She loved to be challenged. She loved to be surprised. She loved his sense of humor. And there he is. You could kind of just tell by looking at, he's a man's man. He's very charismatic. There's that wonderful, wonderful, wonderful movie. It's very long, but it is so charming. There he is with David Niven, who played the lead. And it was funny because Elizabeth Taylor later said, I was one of the few actresses in Hollywood that weren't cast in that movie. That's because Mike Todd had other plans for her. And of course, he just swept her off of her feet. I'm telling you, this is just one of the greatest movies. And I've seen the later versions of this movie, and they just don't compare to this original. It was delightful. I was just grinning from ear to ear throughout the majority of the movie. Really was really great. There he is directing. There they are, out and about. She just adored him. He was older and wiser, and he was just a force to be reckoned with. And he spoiled her just beyond belief. There they are at their wedding, when they got married in 1957, very soon after her divorce from Michael Wilding. They went to Acapulco and got married, and Eddie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds stood up with them as the best man and the maid of honor. Debbie Reynolds, of course, had been a friend of Elizabeth's for years and years, and Eddie Fisher was one of Mike Todd's closest friends. Mike Todd just lavished jewelry and anything that Elizabeth wanted. The sky was the limit. He had made the studio a lot of money with Around the World. Yeah, Sarah says, hi, pups. Yeah, they're voicing their opinion. You know, I rescheduled this stream from last weekend because the new neighbors were moving in, and they were using it's kind of like a shared driveway, but it's behind the security gate. It's more my driveway, but it's in the back of their house. But they used that for the moving van, so they could take furniture in through the sliding glass door, which is easier than the front door. And I knew the puppies were just going to go bananas, and they did that whole day. And so I rescheduled thinking that they would be good, but what was I thinking that? Here is the plane that Mike Todd bought, and he named it the Liz. There he is giving her jewelry. I mean, just nonstop, all the time jewelry. The day they were married, he presented her with $250,000 in jewelry. And, you know, she later, she said that the engagement ring that he had got her, she called it her ice rink, right? It was huge. And she said that Mike used to joke, and he would say, you know, her engagement ring was 29 7/8 of carats. That's how big that diamond was. And he said it was 29 and 7/8 because 30 carats would have just been vulgar. And she got a big kick out of that. There they are with her two sons from Michael Walding. They were really wild about each other. They had a very, very, very passionate relationship, a lot of public fights. They would even get asked about it. Like if news cameras were there, they'd say, hey, we heard a story about a champagne bottle or this and that. And they just said, listen, our fighting is a way of making love. That's just how we relate to each other. Pretty soon, they were expecting a child. There they are inside of the Liz. They were expecting a baby, and in August of 1957, Liza was born. Elizabeth Frances Todd. They called her Liza, and boy, that was Elizabeth just was crazy to have a little girl. It was her third cesarean. So she knew she couldn't have any more children naturally, but she was thrilled to have this baby with Mike Todd. Even up almost until her death, she said Mike Todd and Richard Burton were out of 8 husbands. Of course, Burton was a husband twice, right? Those were the loves of her lives. And she said after Richard Burton, everybody else was just company. That's just all it was. Her next role was opposite of Paul Newman. Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. She played Maggie the cat. And it was going to be exciting, right? Everything was going well. And then on March 22nd, 1958, Mike Todd boarded the Liz to fly to New York. He was being nominated, honored really, as Showman of the Year. Elizabeth wanted to go with him. However, she had a virus and she was very ill, so she had to stay home. And she said she felt almost like Mike knew that he wasn't going to see her again. He kept leaving the bedroom. He would come and kiss her and hug her and tell her he loved her and tell her goodbye. And then he'd see her in a couple days and he'd leave and then he'd come right back in and do it again. And she said he did it 6 times before finally leaving. And at 2:30 in the morning, the plane flew over the mountains of New Mexico. And it was never heard from again. When the wreckage was found, Mike Todd was burned beyond belief. All 4 people on the plane were dead. And the only way that Mike Todd could be identified was by his gold wedding ring. Elizabeth Taylor was absolutely devastated. Friends and family rushed to her side, including Eddie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds. They stayed with her around the clock. Liza, the baby, was only 7 months old. About a month later, Elizabeth returned back to the set. The filming on Cat and Hot Tin Roof had been halted so that she could mourn the loss of Todd. She didn't want to go back to work, but she felt that that's what Mike would have wanted for her. So she returned, but she was visibly exhausted. She was much thinner, but the people on the set had said that it seemed as if she channeled her pain into her role. And the role did earn her her second Academy Award nomination. She had been nominated the first time for Raintree County. Now, Eddie Fisher, she is with Liza. Eddie Fisher, who had been Mike Todd's best friend, best man at the wedding, closest friend, he was spending a lot of time with Elizabeth and her children. Almost, I think at first people thought it was out of duty to Mike, that Mike would have wanted Eddie to be there to look after Liz and the kids. And of course, Debbie Reynolds, Eddie's wife, was at home with two very young children. But she would also come over and spend time with Liz as much as she could. But about a month after Mike Todd's death, the tabloids started reporting an affair. Let's get up. Let's get the other slides up. Can you believe we've already gone through 200 pictures? There they are. There's Eddie and Debbie with their two kids. The tabloids started to report an affair. And there they all are at, there's Eddie, Debbie, Liz, and Mike Todd in Acapulco at their wedding. The tabloids and the fans were absolutely besides themselves. This was not acceptable. Eddie and Debbie were like America's sweethearts, right? Debbie Reynolds, definitely. Eddie Fisher was a singer, right? He did shows all the time in Las Vegas. And they were young. Debbie was so sweet. They had these two babies. And now this. And the tabloids really painted Elizabeth as a homewrecker. It got worse when Hedda Harper, Aunt Hedda, did an interview with Liz and then published that interview. And during it, Hedda asked Elizabeth, she said, what would Mike Todd think of this affair? And Liz replied, Mike's dead. I'm alive. What do you expect me to do? Sleep alone? And Hedda then published that. And Liz swore never to speak to her again. She couldn't believe it. She called her up and said, how could you have published that? And because people were outraged. And Hedda said, you said it. And Elizabeth said, yeah, but I wouldn't have said it if I had known you were going to report it. And Hedda Hopper said, darling, that's what I do. That's who I am. People were just going crazy. This is people picketing outside of one of the Las Vegas venues where Eddie was supposed to have a show. The public couldn't believe it. She went from like this grieving widow that they felt so bad for to really a hated woman. But it didn't stop. It did not stop the two of them from seeing each other. Eddie asked Debbie for a divorce. It's not what she wanted, of course, but that's what was going to happen. In May of 1959, Elizabeth and Eddie were married in a Jewish ceremony. Liz had converted to Judaism for Eddie, so they were married. And then immediately after, she began filming Suddenly Last Summer with Montgomery Clift. She hadn't really wanted to do the movie, but before, it was a Tennessee Williams classic. And it fell a little bit flat at the box office. She hadn't wanted to do the movie. There she is at her wedding to Eddie Fisher. But Mike Todd had made a deal with the studio shortly before his death. And so she owed the studio 2 more films. So because Montgomery Clift was in the film, and rather than be suspended, because that's what they would do, the studio would do that. If you wouldn't accept a role that they wanted, you'd be suspended without pay, and you couldn't go work for another studio until you were back and fulfilling your contract. So she went ahead and did that, kind of begrudgingly. And then in September 1959, oh, that's Butterfield 8. Yeah, we're going to get to that. She agreed. 20th Century Fox had been hounding her about Cleopatra. And she was just getting tired of it. And she said the phone rang. She was in the bathtub. And Eddie answered it. And he said, it's the studio again about Cleopatra. And she said, oh, fine. You know what? She goes, tell him these are my terms. I'll do it for $1 million and 10% of the box office, the gross, from the very first dollar. This, I cannot tell you how unheard of this was. Nobody had ever been paid $1 million. Nobody had ever got 10% of box office receipts from the very first dollar. She said it as a joke, as that she was going to throw something so wild out there, something so outrageous that had never been done before, that she figured the studio would go, oh, fine, and just get over it and give up. And she said Eddie came in and he goes, they said, okay, you have a deal. And she said she just started laughing and plunged underneath the bathwater. She couldn't believe it. However, she still owed MGM a picture. She had one picture left that she had to do before she could get out of her contract. And under much duress, she agreed to do Butterfield 8, which was about a prostitute. She didn't want to do it. She even told the studio, she said, I'm not going to do it. They said, you are going to do it, or you're never going to be released to do Cleopatra or anything else. We're just going to hold on to you under suspension and not pay you forever until you fulfill this last film. And she said, fine, I'll do it, but you have to put Eddie in the movie. And the studios, they didn't want to do that. There he is. They said, he's a singer. He's not an actor. She said, I'm not going to do it unless you put him in the film. She said, I'll show up late. I'll be unprepared. I'll be sick. She said, I'll run your production. They said, fine. She hated the script. She hated the movie. She made sure everybody knew about it, including the press. But she did it and was finally released from that contract. So then she actually got to go sign. She'd already agreed verbally that she would do Cleopatra. But until she was done with her contract with MGM, she couldn't actually sign with 20th Century Fox and get her money, right? There she is, making the deal of the century up until that point. September of 1960, she flies to England with Eddie to start filming Cleopatra. She became ill and filming was stopped. Really ill. Elizabeth was really plagued with a lot of illnesses throughout her whole life. She returned in March of 1961, but filming had to be stopped again because, again, she became really, really, really sick, this time with pneumonia. She fell into a coma. She was pronounced dead at one point, put in an oxygen tank, and they also gave her a tracheostomy to open up her airway. She couldn't breathe. Queen Elizabeth's personal physician attended to her, performed the tracheostomy. A lot of people didn't think she was going to make it. When she did get better, she returned to the States. She had to be taken off of the plane in a wheelchair. She was still very, very, very sick. But 1 month later, while she was in the States, she won her first Academy Award for Butterfield 8, the movie that she had hated so much, the role that she had hated so much. Yul Brynner gave her her Oscar, and she later said, jokingly, that she didn't win the Academy Award. Her tracheostomy had won it. And there she is holding Oscar up in front of her tracheostomy scar. She had that for her whole life. And there she is with Liza. Elizabeth returns to filming of Cleopatra. A lot of things had changed. The men had been recast, and they were now filming in Rome instead of in England. And Mark Antony, the role of Mark Antony, was going to be played by Richard Burton. He was an extremely famous and popular English stage star, especially Shakespearean works. He was married to an actress, Sybil Burton, and Elizabeth was not happy. She found Burton to be crass and rude and drunk all the time. He wasn't much crazier about her, saying she was always late to set. She was never prepared. And there he is, kind of dashing in his Roman attire. But one time within the first few weeks of filming, Burton showed up exceptionally hungover, maybe even still slightly drunk from the night before. And his hands were shaking so bad that he couldn't even hold his coffee cup. And Elizabeth took the cup from him and held it for him. And that, something in that moment changed. I think it triggered that nurturing aspect that we know that she had. There's Richard with his wife Sybil. Richard was, there they are on set. Richard was a notorious womanizer. Sybil had put up with countless affairs that Richard had with women that he did plays with, really with whoever he wanted to. And Sybil just kind of turned a blind eye to it because he always found his way home. Richard Burton would later say about Elizabeth Taylor, because he had never dealt with an actress of that caliber, with that was known all over the world like that. He said, I didn't know. I didn't realize. He thought he could just kind of slide in, have his little affair, have his fun like he'd done so many times before, and then get back out of it. But Elizabeth Taylor, she was front page news. This wasn't going to be a quiet little affair that he could just work out with his wife later. You can see by their body language on set, it became very well known very quickly on set that they were an item. I mean, look at that. You can't deny that. And yet they're both married. Eddie Fisher came over. There's a story about a time when they were having a party at the home. Eddie and Elizabeth Taylor were hosting a dinner party at their home, and Richard Burton showed up. And Eddie Fisher said, "Why are you here?" And Burton, of course, had been drinking. And Burton said, "Well, I'm here to see my girl." And Eddie Fisher said, "Sybil is your girl." And Richard Burton said, "They're both my girls." And Burton, and this is in front of everybody, and Richard Burton then says to Elizabeth Taylor, "Do you love him or do you love me?" And she said, "I love you." So Eddie Fisher, he was thoroughly humiliated. He left immediately. He filed for a divorce. Sybil endured it like she had endured so many of these affairs before. And Richard was he loved Elizabeth, but he had no intention of leaving his wife or his children. He told Elizabeth that at one point. He said, I'm not ever going to leave her. That's just the way it is. And the rumor is that Elizabeth tried to commit suicide. She was taken to the hospital, stomach pumped. The filming had wrapped on Cleopatra. They were now in post-production, which would take about a year. After she got out of the hospital, both her and Burton went to Switzerland in different homes, but it didn't take very long for the press to catch wind that they were back at it. Pictures of them on a boat vacationing. The studio was also getting pretty concerned. Elizabeth had already had all of that press, that really nasty press, with the Eddie Fisher situation. And this was just, it was so blatant. And the Vatican even issued a warning. They denounced Elizabeth Taylor. They said her children should be taken away from her. And it didn't stop these two. 20th Century Fox was, first of all, the film had taken way too long to make because of the illnesses and the switching of casting and having to stop and then moving from England to Rome, right? It was extremely over budget. It kind of started off over budget when they were paying Elizabeth Taylor $1 million for it. They were really concerned that the public was just going to denounce this movie. That people were just going to say, we've had enough with Elizabeth Taylor and we're not going to support this anymore. And at one point, because again, this affair started very early on during the filming, they got to a point in the film where Cleopatra was to be put on this giant sphinx, right? And then drug through the city, and all of the people were there to adore her. And the studio was concerned because they had to hire all of these people as just extras. So these people weren't really under contract, and they were scared that when they filmed this scene that maybe some of the extras would start to boo her, and listen, this was a big scene. But instead, what happened was when they started to pull her out and drag her and were starting to film, the people in the crowd started to chant, Elizabeth, Elizabeth, Elizabeth. So they did have to reshoot the scene, but not for the reason that they were worried about. So Elizabeth and Eddie get their divorce, but Richard Burton is still really reluctant to leave his wife. And things are kind of going okay for him anyway. He's still got the wife and the kids over here, and he's still getting to do what he wants to do with Elizabeth. But finally, Sybil agreed to a divorce for $1 million in a $1 million settlement, and custody of the children. This $1 million, I feel like Austin Powers, $1 million, right? Sybil probably thought Richard wouldn't agree to it. Maybe she thought that was such an outrageous amount of money. But at any rate, um, Richard did get his divorce, and they were married in 1964 for the first time. Cleopatra was released, and some critics hated it, but I would say overall it was a great success. The studio made their money. Elizabeth made her money. She was now married to Richard. Richard had returned to the stage. Elizabeth traveled with him wherever he went. And the public, for some reason, public sentiment had changed, where they had been really vilified and their relationship had been vilified. Now the public couldn't get enough of it. There they are with Richard's children. His two daughters was Sybil. There's, of course, Michael Wilding's children and her daughter with Mike Todd. They were kind of a blended little family. Then Elizabeth adopted a daughter, Maria, she was of German descent, because Elizabeth couldn't have any more children naturally because of her cesareans. So she adopted Maria. These two lived a very extravagant lifestyle. They made a ton of movies together, the Burton and Taylor movies, as they would be known. Some were great, some flopped, but they made a lot of money together. But they spent it as fast as it came in. Richard Burton lavished her with jewelry. They bought a jet. They had homes. They had a Swiss chalet. They had homes. At one point, they bought a yacht and lived on the yacht. And then they made Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Right? They played, this was very iconic. They played a university couple, miserable, drunkards, physically abusive to each other, certainly verbally abusive to each other. Elizabeth packed on the weight. She wore prosthetics, wig, and everything to make her look older and frumpier. And the public absolutely loved it. Elizabeth would later say that out of all of the roles that she played, out of all 55 films that she did, this was her absolute favorite. They were both, the film was nominated for 5 Academy Awards. Both Richard and Elizabeth were nominated. And for the second time, Elizabeth was awarded the Oscar. They then went on to make The Taming of the Shrew. Critics loved it. There she is with some of this jewelry that he bought her. They were really, listen, we can't say that they were like America's little sweethearts or even Europe's little sweethearts, as Eddie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds had once been likened to, right? Couldn't say that about these two. They were volatile. Their fights were legendary. And so were their makeups and their breakups. They made so many movies together at one point over the course of a year because, okay, not with Cleopatra, but the studios really could churn out a movie in 2 or 3 months, right? I mean, we remember that from Judy Garland, that she could make sometimes 3 or 4 movies a year. Incredible pressure, but the way they could just churn them out was crazy. This is Dr. Faustus. It was not that well received. The comedians, not that well received. Elizabeth was on the beach in Famagosto, a Cyprus. Oh, the beach scene. Yeah, I think that was from when they filmed The Sandpiper. Uh, this is here's Richard on their yacht. You can see two of the dogs in the background, and then it all came crashing down. Um, After being together for 10 years in 1974, they divorced. Elizabeth went on to do another small movie. Burton, they said, kind of sobered up for a few months and did okay, but they couldn't stay away from each other. They divorced in 1974, and in 1975, they remarried. Unfortunately, as she is showing off one of her beautiful rings. Unfortunately, the second time around only lasted about 10 months. Oh, burned through those slides. Oh my gosh, 300 pictures down. This time, the second marriage only lasted for 10 months. And in 1976, they divorced for the second and the final time. It wasn't completely attributed to Richard Burton being unfaithful, but it had got out into the tabloids that he was having a dalliance with another woman, and Elizabeth just, though she had been the other woman, she wasn't going to put up with that. And so that was it. Mary Lou says, I've seen a lot of Elizabeth's movies and enjoyed them. She was a great actress. I agree. In 1976, Elizabeth had met John Warren. He was a Republican politician. And they got married in 1976. Elizabeth threw herself into his campaign. He was running for senator. He didn't win, but when the person that won got into a plane accident, he was put on the ticket. And so she did become a senator's wife. She moved to Virginia to live on his farm, which she loved the farm part. Here they are with Barbara Walters. Barbara Walters was a very good friend of both of them. She put on a bit of weight. She said that being a senator's wife or politician's wife in DC was a very lonely thing to be, though she did try to make a go of it. When the weight jokes started to just get a little bit too much, she started a very public round of going to different fat farms. And then she decided that she was going to make a return to acting, that it was just too lonely of a life. And so she did a stage play, she did a small movie, and then in 1982, she appeared on General Hospital. And there she is. And she had fun. She had great fun when she did this. And there's a great blooper reel of her time on General Hospital that's really good. But she was also photographed a lot with Anthony Geary, who played Luke, right, of the famous General Hospital, Luke and Laura. And there were a lot of rumors about the two of them being romantically involved, and that her marriage to John Warren was in trouble, and it was. And shortly after filming on General Hospital, she divorced John Warren. In 1983, after an injury and taking off a lot of pain meds. Uh, Her family confronted her, and she went to rehab for the first time. Uh, she also, that year, 1983, reunited with Richard Burton on stage in Noel Coward's Private Lives. Um, it was not well received. Elizabeth missed something like 30 shows due to illnesses and things like that. Um, it it didn't go well. And at one point, during one of Elizabeth's breaks, Richard took off to Las Vegas and married somebody else. So there would be no reconciliation that way. And Liz was devastated by that. There she is with her oldest son, Michael Welding Jr. He apparently led the intervention that got her to the Betty Ford Clinic that first time. There was a lot being made of her being there. Betty Ford herself gave an interview in a magazine that told what Liz was doing there, that she was mopping floors and taking out the garbage and had chores and just like everybody else. And the public was kind of fascinated by that. In 1984, Richard Burton died at 58 of an aneurysm. And that, even though he had married somebody else the year before, that really rocked Elizabeth. She said later in an interview that she felt if he hadn't died, they would have gotten back together again eventually, because she said it was just something that was fated. Then poor Elizabeth really went through a rough time in these early 80s. In October 1985, her good friend Rock Hudson dies of AIDS. There wasn't a lot known about the AIDS epidemic at that time. People were just starting to talk about it, and the talk wasn't nice. There were comments made like AIDS, God's cure for homosexuality. It was really nasty. There was also a lot of misinformation about AIDS, how you got it. If you guys kind of remember, even Princess Diana being with AIDS patients, and she said she wanted to be photographed, hugging them, holding their hands, so that people would understand that that's not how you got it. Elizabeth was really rocked by Hudson's death, and she was saddened by the public's response to AIDS. And we know that she has such a big heart. And she was saddened by the way people were being treated over their homosexuality. I mean, this is something that had touched her heart for years and years and years, going back into the 40s when she first acted with Montgomery Clift and saw what being in the closet and the fear of being discovered, what that was like for one of her closest friends. And then she watched Rock Hudson do it. And then to have Hudson die of AIDS, which was predominant in the homosexual community, right? And she was sad and she was angry, and she made it her mission to raise money and awareness and education. And in fact, I think in the first year, she raised over $85 million for the cause. She worked with AMFAR, and then she also had her own foundation. In 1987, Elizabeth launches her perfume company, the House of Taylor, debuting her first perfume, Passion. Does anybody remember that? I remember those ads very clearly. She had a couple of high-profile romances. There she is with George Harrison. There were a lot of rumors going around that there was going to be an engagement between those two. It never happened. And here she is with Malcolm Forbes, who she also hung out with for quite some time until he died. And then in 1988, Liz returns to the Betty Ford Clinic. She said she had done very well for years, and then she thought, oh, I can have a drink. And then a drink here or there started to turn into a bottle of wine. And she said, uh-oh. And so she returns to the Betty Ford Clinic. And when she comes out, she doesn't just come out sober. She comes out with a boyfriend. Larry Fortensky, a twice divorced construction worker. Who remembers that? He was 20 years younger than her. Obviously not the polished Hollywood type. And the public was fascinated by this, right? Also fascinated by the fact that Fortensky said, I want to keep working as a construction worker. And so he did. It wasn't very well known that most of his work was for her friends, going and putting up a shelf at the Bel Air home of the Reagans or something like that. But it kept him busy, and the public was fascinated by that. In October of 1991, they were married at Michael Jackson's Neverland Ranch. Yeah, everybody remembers this, right? And there it was. There were helicopters flying around, and at one point, a paparazzi had jumped from a plane onto the property to try to get a picture. It was a madhouse, right? Elizabeth's 95-year-old mother, Sarah, Sarah was in attendance, as were all of Elizabeth's children and her grandchildren. She had a huge private birthday celebration at Disneyland with Larry and Michael Jackson in tow. And she also, there they are, she also released White Diamonds. I'm sure everybody remembers that. That was probably one of the best-selling perfumes of all time. But her marriage was in trouble. And in 1996, she filed for divorce for the 8th time. She divorced Fortensky, who asked for alimony. The man who wanted to keep working as a construction worker now said that he needed alimony so he could continue to live in the style she had gotten him accustomed to. Liz was horrified by this because she had said that not once, not during any of her divorces, had she ever taken anything other than like the jewelry and gifts that were given to her. She never asked for alimony or anything like that. And she was horrified that she had to pay Fortensky alimony. I think she just thought it was so undignified. I think she thought she was really offended by it. But when she died, she still had left him over $8 million. In her will. 1997, she was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and she comes out of it. She comes out of it strong. In 1998, right around the time of the 30th anniversary of the Johnny Carson show, they've been asking her for 30 years to come on the show. She finally comes on the show for Johnny, right? And look, she looks happy. Looks really happy. In 2000, she was made Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire by Queen Elizabeth. And she traveled to London to receive the honor. Julie Andrews was always there. And, Elizabeth, I remember she had a great sense of humor. And when she was asked in an interview, how did you feel receiving that damehood? And she said, well, I'd always been abroad, so it was about time I became a dame. And of course, I think she was thrilled. In 2002, she wrote a memoir called Elizabeth Taylor, My Love Affair with Jewelry. And in fact, when she died in 2011, her jewelry collection was valued at over $150 million. There's that ice rink, that's that engagement ring that Mike Todd gave her, 29 and 7/8 carat. During an interview with Barbara Walters, Elizabeth Taylor brought out some of her jewelry collection, not all of it. This is one of the rarest pearls in the world. It was given to her by Richard Burton. And she said that Richard was off filming one day and she was just parading herself around in the hotel room with this necklace on, just kind of the necklace and nothing else, and catching herself in the mirror and admiring it. And she goes by a mirror and she realizes that the pearl at the bottom is gone. And she says she was beside herself because Richard would kill her over this, right? And so she's down on her hands and knees and she's rummaging through the carpet trying to find that pearl. And then she hears one of the dogs eating a bone. And she thought to herself, that is strange. We don't give the dogs bones. And the dog had the pearl in its mouth. And she said she has no idea that it didn't, how it didn't get nicked and all chewed up. She said there wasn't a scratch on it. Mary Lou says it was stunning jewelry. So this is some of the trays that were brought out for a Barbara Walters interview. And Barbara Walters said only about 1/8 of the jewelry came out. Look at that stuff. I would really like to get a peek at this memoir, Her Love Affair with Jewelry, because I bet it has all the pictures of all the jewelry in it. In 2004, she was diagnosed with congestive heart failure, and that was the cause of her death, March 23rd, 2011. There are fans at her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Of course, friends and family were devastated. Her fans were devastated. She is interred at the Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. A lot of stars are there. As a matter of fact, Elizabeth Taylor's great friend, Michael Jackson, is also interred there. This is actually the spot in the mausoleum where her remains are. And, I find it so sad, really, that a woman with such a big heart, that big heart that just gave and gave and gave, was the thing that kind of finally gave out on her at the end. But Elizabeth, that sense of humor, and she was going to have the last laugh. And she had made arrangements that her remains were not to arrive at the cemetery for the funeral until 15 minutes after everybody else had gotten there. So she truly did arrive 15 minutes late for her own funeral. And everybody really got a chuckle out of that because she was notoriously late on every film set. Everything she did, she was late, still getting ready, still doing this, still doing that. And so she thought it would be a funny thing and a way to lift people's spirits if she showed up 15 minutes late to her own funeral. And so that's what she did. There she is in Lassie Come Home, National Velvet, becoming a cover girl. I mean, becoming a woman, marrying Mike Todd, the Liz. I mean, when I think about Liz Taylor now, and I have such a deeper respect and understanding about her, through all the triumphs and all the tragedies and all the loves and all the losses, this lady persevered. And you can say what you want about her being married 8 times. But what I'll say is she didn't give up on love. She didn't. And that, my friends, is the old Hollywood story. My old Hollywood version of Elizabeth Taylor and her career and her life. And I hope you enjoyed it. It was a massive amount of research and notes. And this is the most slides I've ever had for a stream of mine. But I couldn't see a way to do it any less. Every aspect of her life deserved to be recognized. And I hope that it gave you, we're over time. Of course we are. How could we possibly have stayed within an hour and a half for a stream like this? But if you have any questions, I can try to answer them. I always, it's not that I hope that there's no questions, but I always feel like if there's no questions, then I did a really, really thorough job. But if there is any questions, I could probably answer them. If you haven't seen National Velvet, I suggest you do it. If you haven't seen Mike Todd's Around the World in 80 Days, I suggest you do it. Of course, you're all in different countries, so sometimes there's geo-blocking, right? But if you have a VPN, where you can switch the country on your IP address, there's some great movies on Prime, on Amazon Prime, and there's one called Liz and Dick, and Lindsay Lohan plays Elizabeth Taylor, and I was shocked at what a great job she did. And then there's another one where Sherilyn Fenn, does anybody remember her? She played Liz, and it's called Liz, the Elizabeth Taylor story. It's a 2-part movie, really good. Liz and Dick is strictly about Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, but it was great. And there's a lot of stuff you can find about her on YouTube. There's some really great interviews with Barbara Walters. You can see the YouTube interview with all the jewelry on Barbara Walters. And she was very candid and very unapologetic, and when Barbara Walters said, well, she said to her, well, what do you have to say to people who criticize you for being married 8 times? And Liz said, well, every time I fell in love, it was the marrying kind. Everyone I ever loved, it was the marrying kind of love. And so that's what I did. So I just really, I like her. I like her. And I like her a lot more now. And I hope you guys like her a lot more too. So, the tribe has spoken. I had already put a poll in the Facebook group for who would be the next actor or actress that we would feature. next month sometime in the Old Hollywood Stream series. And drum roll, please, Audrey Hepburn. Audrey Hepburn is who is going to be featured in the next Old Hollywood Stream. So on that note, my friends, thank you for spending your time with me. Thank you for letting me go over time so that you could really embrace this iconic actress and wonderful human being, I think. Again, I just have so much respect for her. So I appreciate you. Please have a wonderful rest of your afternoon or evening. Have a great week next week. Tomorrow's Monday again already. And I will see you on a stream soon. Okay? Bye-bye. Bye, everybody. Thanks again. And don't forget to like the video if you liked it. And if you want to leave a donation, my PayPal link is pinned at the top of the chat. Okay? Bye again, you guys. Thank you so much for your time.